first Keynote present.
Thank you. So my wife made me promise to wear my glasses so I could actually make sure I read the speech right or deliver it. But most importantly, first of all, I need to thank Mark and the board for inviting me. My first ICPHSO was by accident. Over almost 20 years ago, I happened to be in London, and I heard about this event that was at Simmons & Simmons, and I wandered in, and I was welcomed in. I know Mark is here, Mark Dewar, but that was for me an opening and an enlightening time to understand what it is that you all do, what it is that we all do as professionals. And it really helped me on a path. So again, Mark, thank you for asking me to join you and give this speech today. First up, I wanted to say I've been fortunate to travel to over 60 countries. And I've seen places that are very, very different. I've worked with CEOs, presidents, sheikhs, tribal leaders, election hopefuls, and some of you. I started my journey working at a hotel during the Olympics in 1984, and I've been traveling ever since. Going to Berlin, when the wall came down, you heard a little bit about the book. Traveling with Bill Clinton in 1992 in the early days, seeing the changes in China in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Saudi Arabia and the UAE and what's happening there today, and helping Ukraine in its struggles in the war against Russia. What I've learned along the way is that ultimately we're really quite similar at our core. While we might disagree with one another, we actually are trying to do the right thing for our stakeholders. And I think that's a really important thing, and I'll talk a bit about that as we move forward. My job, one that I've cultivated for the past 30 years, has been to impart bridge-building mechanisms in order to achieve success through communications. That word means a lot of things, but in my world, and the world of navigating crises, it really means working through problems to seek the best possible outcomes. It means working to establish a comprehensive narrative, understandable and relatable to your collective stakeholders, whether that be friends, investors, colleagues, employees, customers, media, and of course regulators and others. Our goal, collectively, and mine specifically, has been to help convince you and them to do the right thing with well-established and good intentions. And actually, I think that's really important, to do the right thing. And I think we have to balance that. What's ethically right, what's correct, what's not, and certainly available to talk a little bit about that. But when we assess clients and when we assess what they're doing, for me, the most important thing is that you want to do the right thing. And figuring out what that is, what threshold that is, what level that is, that's key and that's important. And in some ways, that's become increasingly difficult for many of our clients because the world has gotten smaller and smaller. With the advent of social media and the decline of the use of traditional media, it drives us to think 2 steps ahead, meaning you must be exponentially more proactive to safeguard your businesses and proactively look for any gaps in your systems and drive customer support along with creating a resilient business plan for yourself, your company, and your employees. A vital part of our role with clients is in crisis communications. And to put it more bluntly, what happens when shit hits the fan? And I thank you, Mark, for that was that's specifically what I want to talk to you about today. And I'd like to start with a simple question. And it's very serious. Please raise your hand if you have purposely created a product to harm someone or that would fail. No one. Exactly. No respectable company makes something that they know will harm someone, especially a child. And it's a misconception that companies do this. Unfortunately, many counterfeit products that we're increasingly seeing helps to drive this narrative. But unfortunately, that's a perception that some people have. As everyone in this room is keenly aware, product recalls happen all the time and can severely damage a company's reputation and many times affect their bottom line. I want to walk you through not steps, but rather concerns that happen in these scenarios and how the way you choose to react can help greatly impact the outcome if something goes wrong. There are several stages in a crisis. The first being shock. When something happens and you're not expecting, often this affects many people in the company, top management, inventors, creators, employees. It takes time away from your core business, your duties, and your responsibilities. The next phase is denial, where company officials often get wrapped up in saying that this shouldn't be happening to them. What's next? Sorrow. Why me? Why us? Why our company? Then it's true that it's normal to feel anger. Then we often assign blame. In finding someone or some part of the process to attribute the responsibility or the failure of the product or the problem. This could be in production, it could be partners, the design, our compliance team, the US government, consumers who, quite frankly, don't use our product as directed, and many other reasons. Finally, there's acceptance. It allows us to move forward, to find solutions. When crises happen, whether this is a product recall, an issue with employees, lawsuits, major stock drop or others, preparedness and clear communications can make all the difference. Creating a plan in advance for any potential crisis happening is critical. It's something that we advocate, it's something that you all should be looking at doing. A protocol to follow, to be prepared for any potential. Because if you're prepared, you can hopefully mitigate some of the things that I just talked about. And I understand that you think it may not make sense to spend time and money to develop a response ahead of time to a scenario that you don't think will happen. You may have been lucky so far. How many of you have actually gone through a recall? It's a lot of people. And how many of you have a company, you have a product that has not yet gone through a recall, or has not gone through a recall? Okay, so a number of you. So a few years ago, these processes used to be a lot slower. We were afforded more time, carefully curating reactions, spending the time talking through things back and forth. We don't have that luxury today in the fast-moving environment. In order to be steps ahead for crisis, first you need to create a plan. Then you have to formulate messages. And that is really important. It's a key element to going through this. What might happen? What are the possibilities? What are the potentials? Some things that you think are way out in left field. But that's really important to look at. And then you have to communicate those messages and test those messages. And then look for feedback, both internally and of course externally, depending upon how you put this together. And then you have to do it again. And you have to do it again. Some companies think, okay, if I do a crisis plan today, I don't have to bother. And then 10 years later, all of a sudden, something happens. No, it's re-looking at things. It's constantly your toes. It's constantly being prepared. And you should electronically have this available so that you can bring it with you. That if something happens, senior management can access it, whether it's on a shared drive or on your hard drive or otherwise. Because these are things that are critical, whether it's lists, customers, outreach efforts, creating these stakeholder targets so that you can go back and you can look for them in order to make the path go forward. It's a good time for me to interject something about compliance officers. I know this department, and some of you often get short shrift because it's not an explicit revenue generator. Well, I'm here to say to senior management that it's very important, if you want your company to emerge stronger from a crisis, that you spend the time, that you invest in, and that you listen to compliance employees. Work with them to ensure that you're ahead of the curve, not behind it. Watch for shifting seas in regulatory policy, national politics, and other things that may affect how your products are perceived. The crisis that you may be surprised by, they may have seen coming, or could have, if they had the resources behind them to be prepared. I want to walk you through an example of the first recall that I did, which helped me learn so much and informed me for the future over the last 25 years in this business. It was early 1999, and I remember it like it was really yesterday. I went to meet a new client, and one of the lawyers who happens to be in this room. And I myself was very familiar with the product. I used it religiously. My daughter was born a year before, and we were given it as a gift, and I thought it was the greatest thing. I read the directions, I understood the age grading, I understood the weight, and when she was old enough, I took her everywhere in it. My wife used to laugh at me when I said, I'm going to take her out for a walk, I'm going to go get some breakfast, she can go to the gym, and I would take her someplace in the carrier, have some breakfast, she might fall asleep. It was great. It was really something that, for me, as a new parent, I understood how and what I needed to do because I took the time. And not everybody, unfortunately, did. And this recall was a classic example of a parent who hadn't read the directions, hadn't read the age grading and weight. Unfortunately, their child got terribly injured. The makers of the product had no problems in Europe, where the product was first launched. Regulators there didn't see it as an issue. It's one of the reasons why we have conferences like this, to come together to discuss why the differences exist and how to come closer together in formulating a plan that we can all live by. This client didn't have a plan in place. It took us some time to get through and formulate an acceptance by them that this is something that they had to go forward with, that the regulatory agency here in the United States, the CPSC, was making them do something, needed to do something. And what they ultimately did was create another level of security for the parent using the product. And while this made it a hair less utilitarian, it was the right way to address the situation at that time for an activist CPSC. And this case showed me that without a plan in place, we had to really sit down, and it took time. It took more time probably than it needed to, because the inventor, the company, and others hadn't been prepared. And of course, never anticipated something like this would happen to them. It taught me to reinforce to all of our consumer-facing companies that we deal with that a worst-case scenario plan should be thought of, to be looked at, and should be evaluated and created in order to mitigate the potential and also allow you to work faster. Essentially, there are 5 components that I would suggest to be prepared. Some of this has already been talked about, and some of it is sort of common sense. In fact, it's all common sense. Understand why a crisis plan is important. Invest in compliance officers and their needs. Proactively prepare for the worst while doing your best to ensure the worst never happens. Incorporate a global understanding, and I'll come back to that, into all strategy and planning. And then underlining all of that, I have there, understanding how media and social media can influence your decisions. In keeping with the theme of youth products, I want to talk briefly about another recall that I did, which allowed me to learn a lot more about the world. And this was a children's flashlight, kid's flashlight. Unfortunately, the battery was fused into the flashlight, so it was all one piece. And the mechanism, unfortunately, overheated, which led to several minor burns. The company understood what was going on. They recognized it after several complaints. And the leadership hired us and others to look ahead at how we could deal with this, and how we could deal with the regulators, and how we could also come back to what we needed to do as a company to preserve those kind of customers and do what was right. But the flashlights were also sold in 20 jurisdictions around the world, throughout the EU and South Africa. And this posed a new problem, one that I had not worked on at the time, but also for the company because it was their first global recall. And they needed to understand how to balance what they were doing, what they wanted to do in the United States, and how to let customers know around the world. We had to go with the compliance teams and the legal teams to look at the various notification for customers in those jurisdictions. We had to understand the markets. And as mentioned in our first example, with differences with the European Union, they had to discuss and articulate how they were going to go about this recall in order to get ahead of the regulators. So we planned messaging around the reasons, and this was really important, why these flashlights were having a problem, but everything else within their product line was okay. And that was really key, to go to the regulators, to talk through it, to articulate, to show them the mechanisms that were in other products that were similar, and yet why these were the only ones we needed to take off the market. And by doing that, the company ultimately offered refunds to customers, which were double the cost of the flashlight, as well as a replacement if they wanted. That led me to talk a lot about and look at the global perspective. Along with the road trips I've taken, these work experiences have taught me to infuse global thinking into all of the strategic planning. I view incorporating this as really, really important. I know we have done a lot of things over the last several years to bring things back in America and talk about America being great again or being more isolationist. We see that in a lot of different policies that we have. I'm not here to talk about that, but I am here to talk about how the world is so much more intertwined. And you all know that. So many of you are from abroad, and your products are sold in numerous countries around the world. And so while this was the first one that I did globally, we've worked on many since, but it's important to bring these things back home in your office, but to look and think globally, and to act globally, and to understand the markets for which you operate, and how the differences in those markets can affect your products, and can affect the negativity, potentially, of those products. Because any product can have instant success and instant failures. Let's talk about TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, now X, mommy and daddy bloggers, Amazon influencers, false information, fake news. The news cycle isn't what it used to be. Only a small amount of people, not even my 87-year-old mother, get their news from the 6 o'clock news anymore. When a company lacks forward-thinking protocols or doesn't pay attention to what's happening in the social media universe, they immediately lose the ability to control, in any sense, the narrative. I've seen far too many times in the past few years companies lose profits, lose their messaging, due to what I call immediate phone news noise. So much of it comes through regularly on our phone through all kinds of different sources. This is where we see both the exponential and organic growth of product audiences, of products rather, and the potential for immediate downfall. So I brought this today. This is a Stanley Cup. By the way, this is 40 ounces. I don't know how people drink this much. I mean, I got this the other day as a prop for this little thing, and when I got it home, I had no idea how big it was. But apparently it's all the rage. I thought a Stanley Cup was, honestly, I thought Stanley made tools. I thought a Stanley Cup was what the Rangers haven't won since 1994. And for me, I had no idea of really the popularity of it. It was just not something that was coming up on my feed. And social media has made this a must-have. Mark just told me his daughter drinks this, right? Uses it. $750 million in sales in 1 year. In 1 year. This. Look. A lot of truck drivers, but also a lot of like young, cool kids. Became a phenomenon, and recently, through the same social media, the company got hit. How many of you have seen the story on the Stanley Cup over the last couple of weeks? Yeah, a lot of you. And they were forced to put out a statement. They're not a client, by the way. As I said, I had no idea what it was until a couple weeks ago. It was really a non-problem. They flagged the issue of lead that was on the bottom. Apparently it's something on the bottom here that doesn't affect safety, it doesn't affect the product. But they had to go through this within the context of a social media frenzy, of a woman who kind of put it up on TikTok and degrading the brand. Now, I can't tell you if they're going to lose out or if they're going to continue to have massive growth, because I haven't taken such a closer look at that aspect of it, and we'll have to see what happens over the next several months. But they seem to be doing the right thing, because they have responded quickly, and they understood the power of social media. They understood the power to make it a product and to do so well, and they understood what it can do to tear it down. We're seeing nowadays that being unique doesn't just guarantee us that our products will be utilized and, quite frankly, replicated numerous times in different variations. I talked about counterfeit earlier, and I think we're seeing more and more of this, and I think in 2024, this could be even more of a driving factor for why regulators come to your doorsteps, because they blame you for something that's happening to a product that isn't made with the same care and understanding that you all do in your business. It's important to emphasize a strong narrative that distinguishes your product from others on the market, highlighting the intricacies of your safety standards and testing. It should be integrated not only in a crisis plan, but it should also be in your day-to-day messaging. In our first case study, if it happened today, that lag time that it took us to get everybody together, to have the founder understand and accept what was really happening, if that happened in today's world and that mother put something on TikTok or Facebook or otherwise, it could have gone viral, it could have destroyed the company, which is thriving today. Anyone with a smartphone could have known quickly through social media about it. And because people have injured child on their minds, as they should, as young parents particularly, connecting with baby products, that carrier could have immediately dropped in sales. Finally, our job and your job is to stop that from occurring before it ever happens. It's to predict the possibilities of future potential problems and prepare as well as possible. The world is a big place with a lot of distinct global regulations, but because of supply chain's popularity and of course the internet, it's becoming smaller and smaller and faster for information. Great products are being made by all of you in this room. But until there's one incident, one complaint, one problem, one post, or one difference in how a regulator may view things, you have to be prepared. While we have debates going on about personal responsibility and how a product should or could be used, and following directions, which is important, and whether people can actually follow directions. These things are important to help you put your messaging together. Assess whether you can fight back and stand your ground, something that, quite frankly, we advocate often with our clients. Because oftentimes there's a reason to push back. There's a reason to fight back. There's a reason to negotiate the best possible changes that you can do for your company, because you don't want to go as far as some of the regulators oftentimes push you, because it may or may not be necessary. Coming up with that focus, coming up with that messaging is something that you have to work through. While it's a bit harder in the environment that we're in now, politically as well as with social media, companies need to find their balance in order to make sure that the true story gets out. It's not just something that happened with one of your products. Because shit can and will happen. We've seen it. I've been around the world, and I've seen how companies understand how to prepare for and deal with what might happen so that they can move forward and succeed. I hope you'll be one of them. I'm sure you'll be one of them. Thank you for the opportunity, and happy to take some questions. I don't know how much time we have.